"You don't need to come anymore," my daughter said. She regretted it days later. The day my daughter told me not to bother coming to Sunday dinner anymore, I was standing in her kitchen with a casserole dish still warm in my hands, and I remember thinking quite calmly that this was the moment I stopped being useful to her. Not unloved, just used up. My name is Amanda, I'm 72 years old, and what I did in the 6 weeks after that sentence changed everything she thought she understood about her mother. If you've ever been discarded by someone you built your whole life around, stay with me, because this story doesn't end the way she expected it to. Before I go further, if you believe people deserve consequences for how they treat the ones who raise them, hit that like button right now, and subscribe if you want to hear the rest of what happened. And tell me in the comments where you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one, and it helps me know this story is reaching the people who need it. Let me back up. I raised my daughter alone after my husband died when she was 9. I worked 2 jobs, I never remarried, and everything I had I built for her. When she got married, I sold half my furniture to help with the down payment on her first house. When her husband lost his job for 8 months, I quietly covered her mortgage without ever mentioning it to a soul, not even to her, because I didn't want her to feel like a charity case. When her son was born, I moved my whole life around to be available for her. Babysitting, cooking, driving him to school when she had early shifts. For 11 years, Sunday dinner at her house was sacred to me. It was the one thing on my calendar I never missed, rain or shine, cane or no cane. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being her mother in her eyes and became something closer to staff. An inconvenience with opinions. A woman who took up space at her table and offered advice nobody asked for. The trouble really started about 8 months before that Sunday, when I made the mistake of asking a simple question about my own house. The house I've lived in for 41 years, the house my late husband and I paid off dollar by dollar, the house that still has his handwriting on the inside of the pantry door where he used to mark our son's height. Except we never had a son, just her, so it's her height, faded now, but still there if you know where to look. My daughter and her husband had been circling that house for years. Not directly. Never directly. It was always framed as concern. "Mom, that house is too big for you. Mom, the stairs aren't safe. Mom, wouldn't it be easier if you just signed it over to us now so there's no estate mess later? And we'll let you live there as long as you want, we promise." I heard some version of that speech at least a dozen times over the years, always delivered with a smile, always wrapped in the language of love and practicality. I'm 72, not senile. I know what a wolf sounds like even when it's wearing my daughter's voice. I kept putting them off gently. I said I wasn't ready to think about that yet. I said my lawyer, yes, I have a lawyer, and yes, that seemed to genuinely startle them the first time I mentioned it. I said my lawyer had advised me to keep my affairs exactly as they were for the time being. That was true. Still is. The tension over the house simmered for months, but it boiled over on a Tuesday in early spring when my daughter called to tell me, almost as an afterthought, that she and her husband had already spoken to a real estate agent about getting a sense of what the house might be worth someday. Someday. As if I were an expiration date they were tracking on a calendar. I didn't yell. I've never been a yeller. I simply asked her quite plainly why she was pricing out a house that wasn't hers. She didn't like that question. Not one bit. She told me I was being paranoid, that I was twisting a harmless conversation into something sinister, that everyone plans for the future, and I should be grateful she was even thinking about me at all, instead of just letting the house rot with an old woman inside it. Those were her words. Rot with an old woman inside it. I remember setting the phone down on the counter for a second just to breathe, before I picked it back up and told her I needed to go. After that, the Sunday dinners got colder. My grandson, who used to run to the door when I arrived, started staying in his room longer before coming down. My daughter's husband stopped making eye contact with me over the roast. And my daughter herself began finding small, precise ways to remind me that I was a guest in a house I had once helped pay for, not a mother who belonged there. Then came the Sunday itself. I brought the casserole, same as I always did, walked in, and found the table set for 4 instead of 5. I didn't say anything at first. I set the dish down and I asked lightly if I should grab another plate. My daughter looked at her husband, then back at me, and said the sentence that ended a chapter of my life I didn't even know was closing. "Mom, you don't need to come anymore." It's a lot, honestly. We need our own space as a family. Our own family. as if I had spent 31 years standing outside of it, peering in through a window. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what happened next. I am not a woman who screams, and I am not a woman who begs. I have buried a husband, raised a daughter alone on a nurse's salary, and survived things in my 72 years that would break people half my age. When someone shows me, clearly and without ambiguity, where I stand, I believe them. I nodded. I picked my casserole dish back up because apparently even that wasn't welcome anymore, and I said, "All right, that's what you want." And then I drove home and I did something I hadn't done in 8 months. I called my lawyer, not to ask a question this time, but to give an instruction. For years my will had left the house, and the modest savings I'd built up nursing for 38 years, to my daughter outright, no conditions, no strings. That Sunday night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with the casserole going cold beside me, I asked my lawyer to draft something different. A trust. One that would eventually benefit my grandson directly, protected until he was old enough to make his own decisions about it, completely outside his parents' control. And I asked about something else too, a life estate on the house itself, so that no matter what happened, no matter who tried to maneuver around me, I would have the legal right to live in my own home for as long as I wanted, full stop, no negotiation. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the people you sacrifice for started treating your love like it was owed to them instead of given, I want you to know your boundaries are not bitterness. They are self-respect. And if this story is resonating with you so far, go ahead and drop a like. It truly helps this reach the people who need permission to protect themselves too. The weeks after that dinner were quiet in a way that felt almost peaceful. I didn't call. I didn't text. For the first time in over a decade, my Sundays belonged entirely to me. I started going to the community center 2 streets over, the one I used to wave off because Sunday dinner always came first. I joined a watercolor class. I made a friend named Josephine who'd lost her husband around the same time I lost mine, and we started having coffee on Wednesdays, just the two of us, no obligations, no walking on eggshells. My daughter noticed the silence before I expected her to. About 10 days after that dinner, she texted asking if I was upset. I told her honestly that I wasn't upset. I was simply respecting what she'd asked for. Space. Her own family. I told her I loved her and that door would always be open if she ever wanted to talk, but that I wasn't going to keep inserting myself where I clearly wasn't wanted. She didn't respond to that one. But her husband called 2 days later, and that's when I learned what had actually been driving the last 8 months of tension. It turned out they'd taken out a home equity loan against their own house to cover some financial trouble he hadn't told her about at first. Trouble with his business partner. Trouble that had eaten through their savings faster than either of them wanted to admit. And in the middle of scrambling to cover the gap, someone, I won't say who exactly suggested it, had floated the idea that my house, once it was in their name, could be used as additional collateral for a second loan to bail them out completely. I sat very still on the phone while he explained this to me, dancing around the actual point the way people do when they're asking for something they know they don't deserve. Eventually he got to it. Would I reconsider signing the house over now, given the circumstances? Given the family needed it? I asked him one question. Did my daughter know he was calling me about this? He went quiet for a long moment and that told me everything. I told him as gently as I could manage that the house was not, and would never be, collateral for anyone's financial mistakes, and that if my daughter wanted to have this conversation, she was welcome to have it herself, honestly and directly, the way I tried to raise her to do. Then I wished him well and I hung up. That night I sat with Josephine on my porch and I told her the whole thing start to finish. She didn't tell me I was right or wrong. She just squeezed my hand and said something I've thought about every day since. Amanda, you spent your whole life making yourself smaller so everyone else could feel bigger. Maybe it's alright to just take up your own space for once. If you've got someone in your life like Josephine, someone who tells you the truth without flinching, comment below and tell them who that person is for you. And if you don't have someone like that yet, maybe this community can be it for a little while. 3 weeks after that phone call, my daughter finally showed up at my door herself. No husband, no warning, just her standing on my porch looking like she hadn't slept properly in days. I let her in. I made tea because that's simply what you do regardless of where things stand. And she told me in pieces what had actually happened after that Sunday dinner. The silence had done something she hadn't anticipated. Without me quietly smoothing things over every week, without my advice, without my help watching my grandson on the days she needed extra hands, without even realizing how much of the family's actual functioning had depended on me showing up and doing the invisible work nobody thanked me for. Things had started to genuinely fray. Her son had asked more than once why Grandma stopped coming, and she hadn't had an answer that didn't make her feel ashamed to say out loud. Her husband's financial situation had gotten worse, not better, and the strain of trying to solve it without any support system had put a crack in their marriage that she said she could physically feel every time she walked into a room with him now. And underneath all of it, she said, was the sentence she couldn't stop hearing herself say. "You don't need to come anymore." She said she'd meant it as boundary setting at the time, something she'd read about in some article, some idea about protecting her nuclear family. But she said she hadn't understood, until the silence actually arrived, that boundary setting and discarding a person who has spent her entire life pouring into you are not the same thing at all. She apologized. Genuinely, I believe, tears and everything, sitting right there at my kitchen table where she used to do her homework as a little girl. She apologized for the house pressure, for her husband's phone call, which she said she hadn't known about until after the fact and was furious over, for the years of small comments about my age and my usefulness that she said she now realized had been building toward that Sunday without her even fully admitting it to herself. I listened to all of it, and then I told her the truth calmly, the way I try to tell everyone the truth. I told her I forgave her, because holding on to that kind of resentment costs more than it's worth at my age, and I'm not interested in spending whatever years I have left carrying anger around like a second purse. But I also told her that forgiveness and restoration are two different things, and that some decisions I'd made in the quiet weeks after that dinner were going to stay exactly as they were. I told her about the trust. I told her plainly that the house would eventually go to my grandson, protected, untouchable by anyone's business troubles or financial emergencies, available to him when he was old enough to understand what it meant to actually earn and protect something. I told her I still loved her completely, that none of this came from a place of punishment, but that I needed her to understand, once and for all, that love and access are not the same currency. She could have my love unconditionally. Access to my resources, my time, my home would depend entirely on how she chose to treat me going forward. She cried harder at that part than at any other part of the conversation, and I understood why. It's one thing to apologize for hurting someone. It's another thing entirely to realize the apology doesn't automatically restore what was there before. If you've ever had to learn that difference the hard way, that forgiving someone doesn't mean handing them back the exact same trust you had before, I want you to know you're not cold for holding that line. You're wise. And if this story means something to you, subscribing genuinely helps me keep telling stories like Amanda's. So if you haven't already, now's a good time. It's been almost a year since that Sunday dinner where I picked my casserole dish back up off her table. Things are better now, though different than before. My daughter and I talk every week. I still go to dinner sometimes, but not every Sunday, because I've built a life of my own now that doesn't revolve entirely around being needed by her. My grandson calls me directly now on his own phone just to talk, which honestly means more to me than almost anything from this whole ordeal. Her husband and I keep things polite but distant, and I think that's exactly where that relationship should stay, given everything. The trust is still in place. The life estate on my house is still in place. I don't say that with bitterness, I say it because I learned something at 72 years old that I wish I'd learned decades earlier. Love someone with your whole heart, but never, ever hand someone the legal keys to your peace of mind, no matter how much you love them, until you're absolutely certain they'll treat that trust the way it deserves to be treated. Josephine and I still have coffee every Wednesday. Some Sundays now, when the house feels a little quiet, I think about that woman standing in the kitchen holding a casserole dish, being told she didn't need to come anymore. And I feel something close to gratitude for her, honestly, because she's the one who finally taught me it was all right to take up space in my own life again. If this story reminded you of your own family, your own difficult sons or daughters, your own house that everyone seems to have opinions about, tell me your story in the comments below. I mean that. I read them all, every single one. And so many of you have shared things with me that stayed with me long after I closed my laptop. Give this video a like if you believe boundaries are an act of self-respect and not an act of cruelty. Subscribe if you want more stories like mine. And tell me one more time, from wherever you're sitting tonight, where you're watching this from. I'll see you in the next one.